Welcome back to Between Now and Success. This is another episode in a series of conversations that I'm having with my colleague, Amy Koenig. Amy is another coach here with me. And what we're doing here is we are taking one topic and we're going to go deep with it. And these topics are pretty much prompted by things that we are having frequent conversations with in our conversations with clients. And this particular one here today, Amy, as we were getting ready to talk about this today, was really prompted from a recent podcast that I did with Erin Scannell. And I just want to say, if you're listening to this and you've not listened to the episode with Erin, I would strongly encourage you to go back and listen to it because it's a great episode. It's the second one I've done with Erin. He's got a great firm out there in the Seattle, Washington area. He's got multiple offices. And he's got about $4 billion in assets that he's managing these days. So anyway, as part of that conversation with Erin, one of the things that he said was that over the course of his business, at one point, he had 800 clients that he was the lead advisor for. And he said, today, I have 0 that I'm the lead advisor for. And then what was also very interesting about that was he said, over the course of building his business from 0 to 4 billion in assets under management, the hardest thing he had to do was go from 800 clients down to 0. And Amy, I know you've been coaching for many years. You've had a lot of these conversations as well. Does that sort of ring true with the advisors that you work with in terms of how emotionally draining and difficult it can be to move those relationships from people that maybe you've been working with for 20 years to another advisor in the firm?
Oh, absolutely. And I think advisors sometimes get very consumed with they're just not going to be okay with this, that this decision is not going to be something that they're going to feel comfortable with. And as I say with so many times when I'm coaching advisors, is it's about their confidence. They have to be confident in who they're handing those clients off to and how they're making that transition. That's really what's going to make it make or break it. And so, yes, I've definitely seen people do it wrong. I've seen people do it very well. It's all about the preparation and building your confidence in what you're going to say.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about here in today's episode is all that preparation and really a step-by-step process in how to do that. And one of the things I also find is what are the reasons why an advisor would want to do this? Why would you want to move clients where you're, quote, the lead advisor over to someone else in the firm? And I'm going to share a couple of reasons that I see often. Amy, you may have some others that you want to add to this list, but one of them is you get burned out. After doing this for 20 years, 25 years or so, it can start to feel like deja vu all over again, to take a Yogi Berra phrase there. And that you start to get burned out, saying the same thing day after day, week after week, year after year with these client review meetings. And so at some point, a lot of advisors feel like, I need a new experience. I need to be doing something new that's really going to challenge me instead of continuing to have the same conversation over and over. So that certainly is a big reason why advisors want to move clients off of their plate. And that really leads to the second key reason that I see is when you have, and I do this all the time in my coaching, like oftentimes when I have a new coaching engagement, one of the first things we're going to work on is how can we free up your time? How can we have fewer clients for whom you are the lead advisor so that you've got new time, you've got new capacity to focus on the things that are really going to move the needle? And one way that I like to look at this is I like to think in terms of 3 circles. So if you're an advisor and you think about these 3 circles, so ask yourself in one circle, what is it that you love to do? A second circle is, what are you really great at? And then the third circle is, what is it that you could do that is really going to move the needle for your firm in terms of where you want the firm to go? And so if you think about those 3 circles, where those 3 intersect is really a sweet spot for you to think about in terms of how you want to spend your time. And when you look at it in those terms, oftentimes advisors will say, there was a point in time when having 150, 200, 800 clients was really a sweet spot for me. That was the best use of my time. But at this stage of my career, that's probably not the highest and best use of my time. And so they'll often find that, hey, I want to go from having fewer clients to now spending more time on the visionary part of the business, more time on the CEO type responsibilities, and more time in really developing the team and really setting that direction for the firm. And those are a couple of the key areas that I see when an advisor says, hey, I need to move some of these clients over to another advisor. So Amy, what are you seeing? Are you seeing some other times when it makes sense for advisors to make this kind of transition?
Of course, there's the retirement. We all know that the advisor community is aging, as we all are. But as that happens, certainly more of those conversations about how do I start to make that adjustment and hand that over to a senior advisor, maybe I'm selling the firm to, or maybe an associate advisor that I've brought on for that purpose and am going to build up over a few years. But there's also things like if you're selling your firm, sometimes when you sell your firm, I certainly see advisors who are asked to stay with the firm to help retain those clients as the firm is sold. And so it's a similar type of conversation. In all of these, there's going to be different nuances, but obviously the conversation you may look a little more with selling your firm on what are the great qualities of the new firm that has purchased your firm. What does that look like? Instead of reiterating what we're going to maybe talk about a little bit more today in uplifting your own firm and the things you've built and allowing yourself to be more of a generalist in the firm versus a specialist with just working with clients. But a couple of other things that you might see is, like you said, you already said the lead advisor changing to more that CEO role, but there may be clients that just aren't a great fit for yourself, but they might work really well with another advisor that you've brought on board. Great reason to transition. And sometimes clients or advisors leave the firm. And when that happens, there's going to be either they have to come back to the lead advisor or they're assigned to another advisor. And so that communication can happen there as well. So there's really a lot of different situations where you see these tools, these steps that we're going to go through today come into play.
Excellent. All right, let's dig into this. And so we've created a framework here, and I view this really in three parts or three stages. So the first part would be the initial planning and communication phase. So this is all about really trying to figure out, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What's the ultimate objective here? What is all that going to look like? And so there's a lot of some prep work that we can do here, and we're going to walk through what some of those steps are. And then part two would be the actual where the rubber meets the road, which is where we're going to be having these conversations with the client, with the lead advisor, with the associate advisor to whom this client is going to be transitioned to. So that's really about having these joint client meetings. And then the third phase is really about what I would call debrief and adjust. And so that's really making sure that you're debriefing how things are going, you're getting some feedback both from the advisor that they're transitioning to, as well as from the clients. And then based on that feedback, you can make any adjustments that are necessary. So I really view that as three stages. And this is something that, depending on the depth and breadth of this transition, this is something that you might want to start a year and a half ahead of time. It could be more, depending on the particulars of your firm. So this is not something that you decide on a Friday and you start transitioning on a Monday. And I think everyone listening to this is aware of that. But yeah, this is definitely something that's going to take some advanced planning. So we're going to give you a comprehensive framework here. Not saying you have to do every single one of these steps, but I really want to give you the opportunity set here, the full framework, and then you can determine for your particular needs which of these are going to make the most sense. So let's start with this initial phase here, the planning and the prep. So I think the first step, as I see it, is to create two lists. So the first list is your list of clients that you're going to transition that are key clients of the firm, that these are people that you want to make sure this gets done right. You want to make sure that these clients are going to stay with the firm and they're not going to leave. So you're going to pay special attention, obviously, to these clients. So that's the first list. The second list is going to be a list of folks that are not as critical to the survival or the thriving of the firm. This might be a list of people, for example, let's say that you were with a broker dealer, and let's say you've got 500 clients between maybe two of you advisors or three of you advisors, and you decide you're going to switch to another firm, or perhaps you're going to start your own firm. Ask yourself, of those 500 clients, are there some that you're okay if they don't transition with you to the new firm? So maybe that's a way to think about who might be on this second list as people that you wouldn't necessarily bring to a new firm if you were moving from one firm to another. So there's your two lists there. I think that would be a good first step. So anything to add to that, Amy?
Yeah, it made me think of segmentation. I think this is a perfect place if an advisor has not segmented their clients in a bit. This is a great way to go through that. And I always hesitate to say that because everybody's, oh, it's just about a number, how many assets under management they have or the revenue they bring to the firm. And when I segment, I definitely don't recommend that. That's important part, obviously, as you were talking, if there's clients on the maybe not even bringing any assets to the firm or any revenue to the firm, those are clients, yeah, you could probably let go and it's not going to show a huge impact. But especially as you're identifying your key clients that you want to make sure you have that personalized transition for, you want to make sure that you're judging that on things like, do you like this person? Is it somebody that your firm, the rest of the people in your firm, there's, oh, I just saw so and so, or somebody called and I was so excited about it. Those are the sorts of things that really build a little bit of that culture of your firm. And you want to make sure that those clients, as you're going through a transition, are really taken care of. So, yes, revenue important, but just as important, are they providing referrals? Do you like them? Does the team like them? Are they easy to work with? Do they take your recommendations? All of those things.
And to your point about clients being taken care of, I want to make sure that we're very clear here in terms of every client is valuable. And I don't want to leave the impression that, oh, yeah, we can just leave these clients behind at the other firm, or we're not going to worry about these clients, or these clients aren't as valuable as some other client might be. Every client is valuable. And if you do decide that some of these clients aren't necessarily on that first list, that's okay. But we want to make sure that they're taken care of. We want to make sure that they're getting everything that they deserve. And if for some reason they decide not to move with you as you make this transition, and if they're on the list to try and move to another advisor in your firm, that you do everything you can to take care of them because they were there when you needed them and they'd been loyal up to a point. And there's definitely an obligation there to take care of them and make sure that they find a new home if they so decide that they don't want to make the transition to the new advisor. So I just want to make sure
Yep.
we're all clear on
Every,
that.
yep, every client deserves great service. They just don't all require the same service. And absolutely true.
Or service from you. And
Exactly.
I have that conversation a lot as well with advisors. I've had this client for 20 years and they've got $450,000 and now my firm is generating 10 million in revenue. And I'm like, I get that. I know you've got great emotional tie up here with that client, and that's wonderful. And I'm not telling you you should no longer be their advisor. I'm just giving you the opportunity that
Yeah,
they can still be with the firm. It just doesn't mean that you have to be their particular advisor anymore. So
exactly.
again, every advisor has to decide what's important to them and what the priorities are. And as coaches, our job is not to tell you what to do. It's really to give you the opportunity to broaden the horizon, to open the aperture a little bit more so that you can see what's possible and then help you make a decision that's going to be best for you and your firm. Okay, so we got these two lists. So we're going to start with essentially list number one, and I'm going to call this next step here a client knowledge transfer. Now, hopefully, y'all have a pretty good CRM system, and you should have really good historical information about the client. But let's be real here, which is that if you have a long-standing relationship with a client, you obviously have a lot of information in your head that is not showing up in any of the history with that client in the CRM system. So I always like to say that when you're making this transition, when you sit down with the advisor for whom you're transferring this client to, and do what I would call a brain dump session, where basically you're going to sit down and ideally you can record this. So you can use Zoom like Amy and I are having our conversation here today or some other system and just basically do a brain dump and say, hey, here's the particular nuance of this client. Here's some of the history that isn't necessarily in our CRM system. Here's some things that I think it's important for you to know about this client. And the benefit of this brain dump session is that you've got all this accumulated history with the client. And so one of the concerns or fears that the client is going to have is, hey, I've invested 20 years with you and bared my heart and soul with you for 20 years, and now I have to start over with this new person. So we want to try and minimize that gap as much as we possibly can. So the more that you can do in the brain dump session here, the more that you can get into the record there, you record it. We've got AI today, of course. And so we can use AI to then take that brain dump. We get the transcript, and then we can summarize that, and we can have that as attached as a record there in the CRM for that client. And then, of course, that makes it really easy for the new advisor to be able to review that prior to meeting with the client so that they can stay refreshed and recall some of the nuance of this particular client. So I'd love to see the senior advisor do the brain dump session for each of the clients that they're transferring over. And I think that'll help make a nice, smooth transition. And then, of course, all that is then attached into the CRM system. So anything to add to that, Amy?
I've actually had a little bit of this experience like advisors do. So I've been a coach, gosh, it's 20 years this year, if you can believe that. Thank you for hiring me so long ago. But at our previous firm, we actually had at one point about 1,000 coaching members. And I think at one point I was coaching around 200 and an associate of mine was coaching around 400. Luckily, we had the opportunity to grow. And as that happened, I took on some more project management responsibilities. And some of my coaching members, same thing, had to have a discussion saying, we have a new coach. I think he's going to be a great fit for you. Here's why. But the documentation is so important. One of the coaches, they'd put 2 or 3 words in about what they talked about. And that was really all I got as it pertained to that particular. So having that brain dump one-on-one session with him to really learn what's important or tell him what was important if I was transitioning to him was so important. And it's a step you just can't miss. You can't transfer everything, but you got to do your best to at least help them get a feel for who the person is and what makes them tick.
Yeah. And I would say here, step 3 in this initial planning phase is to develop a communication plan. So right along with what you're talking about here is it's important that not only the senior advisor who's transitioning the client and the other advisor who's going to be receiving these clients, of course, they've got to know what's going on. But it's critical that the rest of the firm understands what's going on too, because we want to make sure that we are communicating a consistent message to our clients, regardless of which team member that client might be talking to. So before we start the transition, it's important to have a communication plan in place to talk about what the messaging is, to talk about what the story is, to talk about the reason why we're doing this transition. So just a simple one. If the senior advisor is starting a phased out retirement plan, then you wrap the story around that. You talk about, hey, this advisor is 65 or 67 or 70, and over the next 3 years, they're going to be phasing out of the firm, and the other leaders in the firm are going to be continuing to take a greater leadership role. So make sure you've got the story down pat. And I would literally write it out and make sure that everyone on the team understands what the story is, understand what your talking points are. And everyone on the team ought to be able to communicate those talking points if they are having a conversation with a client that's being transitioned and that client happens to ask a question. We want to make sure that there's the consistent message that's getting out there. So definitely spend some time crafting what that communication plan is there as a firm. And then along with that, you're going to have, I would say, individual communication plans with a particular client. So this really gets back to the brain dump idea that if there's anything specific or unusual about this client, maybe they've got several family members that are also clients of the firm. So we've got to think about, is the new advisor, are they also going to be the advisor for these other family members, or just how that's going to happen? So there could be different nuances here. So we want to make sure we've got the corporate communication plan, and we want to make sure we've got the individual communication plan for those clients that are on that first list that I had mentioned here in the beginning. Anything further on that one, Amy?
Yeah, just a little bit about the internal communication being so important. And advisors may say, why does my director of first impression or my receptionist need to be aware of this? They take your phone calls, they take your incoming phone calls. And if a client that is being moved to another advisor calls in, what is your plan? Do you have a plan? Is it going to go to the advisor? Maybe they have requested, which is probably the best idea. Have it go to the advisor and the advisor will address it. But just to be aware, maybe they'll call in and say, I don't know who my new advisor is. Oh, you know what? I'd be happy to help you with that or whatever. the script might be of how you want that to be handled. It really is all parts of the organization that need to be aware.
All right. So number 4 here in this first part is to still part of the communication plan, which is to develop some stories, develop some analogies, and be prepared for any objections that your clients may have about this transition. So Amy, you and I love storytelling. We love analogies. We do a lot of that work in our work as coaches and some of our other work as well. But the best way that we can communicate a point is through a story or through an analogy. And so I think it's important that as you're having this conversation, that you can relate it in a way and in language that your client can really understand. And so we're not going to go through these here in our podcast, but we'll have a separate document on the show notes here where we will have an example of like stories and analogies and common objections that you're going to get. And we've actually written out some examples of stories, analogies, and how do you respond to these common objections. So we'll have a Word document that you can download and get access to those. So simply go to stevesanduski.com. That's STEVESANDUSKI.com and look for this episode here with Amy and just click on it and you'll get to the show notes and you'll be able to download that document. We'll also have pretty much everything that we're talking about here will be laid out nicely for you as well. If you're following along here trying to take some notes, we'll definitely have some good notes for you that you can download in the show notes. So again, have some stories, analogies, prepare for those objections. So I would say step number 5 here in the first part is to increase the associate advisor's visibility. And this one I think is really critical because one of the objections that you're likely to hear is, hey, I feel like I'm getting the B team here in the sense that, hey, you're the lead advisor, your name's on the door, that sort of thing. And now I'm getting this other person who maybe has 10 years of experience and you've got 30 and I don't see their name on the door. And I feel like I'm not going to get the same quality of advice as I'm getting from you. So while there may be some legitimate concern about that, you're going to have to do everything that you can to alleviate that. And one of the ways that you can help alleviate that is to systematically increase the visibility and the credibility of that associate advisor. And there's a number of things that you can do there from the standpoint of make sure that they start taking a more prominent role in the firm's communication. And you should start planning this well ahead of when you get to step 2 here, which is actually making the transition, having those joint client meetings. So your associate advisor should start leading. Let's say you're doing webinars. Maybe they should start leading the webinars. If you're doing social media posts, they need to be taking a more prominent role in social media. Your website, this is an area that I think a lot of advisors don't necessarily think about, but start increasing the prominence of your associate advisor or associate advisors on the website so that when people go there, it's not your face that's plastered all over it. It's the associate advisor to help increase their credibility. Have more content that is authored by the associate advisor. So do everything that you can to elevate their credibility, to elevate their visibility in the eyes of your clients. And I think that's going to go a long way. If you're doing in-person events, same kind of thing. Maybe you do a little bit of an introduction and then exit stage right. And now it's going to be taken over by your associate advisor and other folks at the firm. So we really want to elevate them while at the same time you're starting to fade a little bit more into the background so clients aren't seeing that, oh, you're still the wizard behind the curtain kind of thing. We want them to be relying on the other folks on your team. And that's the only way you're really going to be able to build an enterprise, an enduring business, is if you're able to step back, if you're able to step away, and the business can still thrive. And I think one measure to think about that is, and I recall this from John Jones, Brighton Jones, which is a multi-billion-dollar RIA firm out in the state of Washington. And years ago, he was a co-founder of the firm. He actually stepped away for a year and traveled with his family. And when he came back a year later, the firm was bigger than when he left. And so I think that's a great measure of how dispensable you've made yourself in the business. If you can step away for a year and the business will be bigger when you come back. The more dispensable you can make yourself in the business, the more indispensable your business will become to your clients. And so that's when you've made the transition from being more of a self-employed lifestyle type practice to an actual thriving business organization enterprise that has great value and will continue long after you are no longer at the helm. Anything to add to that, Amy?
Yeah, one of the things that you said there is you have to elevate, especially in an associate advisor type of situation. They're probably younger, probably less experienced, but one thing that I've seen work very well. I had an advisor I was working with who had 600 clients and decided really to step away from the advisor role completely. So he hired 3 client service advisors or client servicing advisors. Those 200 clients went to each of those advisors. So when they were having the discussion of you're going to now be working, your primary advisor is, all clients were going. This advisor was able to say, even my mother is going to be working with whichever of the one that was going to be assigned to. It really gave them the ability to say, you're not losing me. This is the evolution of my firm. I'm no longer in that capacity. I'm the CEO. And especially if you have business owner clients, it's such an easy way to say there was a point where you probably were putting together the widgets. So you don't do that anymore because you were able to hire other people who could do that part for you. You're not a widget. I'm not saying your clients are widgets. I'm just saying there is some of those capabilities that you can train somebody and they may even do a better job as a relationship manager in that situation.
Yeah, a great point there about they may be able to do a better job than you in that situation. And going back to the conversation I had with Erin Scannell, that's exactly what he said. He said, I realize, and that was one of his talking points to his clients was he said, I'm good at what I do, but the fact that I'm working with more clients than I can effectively handle means I'm probably functioning more as a generalist than I am as a specialist. And while I think you're getting good service, I don't think you're getting the best service you possibly can because I've got too many clients I work with. So by us adding new staff, adding new advisors, and sharing the number of clients that we're working with across a number of advisors, we're going to be able to provide even better service to you. So there are obviously some great ways that you can communicate this. And I think that's another example of how to communicate it is yeah, you may be losing me, but ultimately you're probably going to get better service because now we've got someone who is really going to have the time to focus more on your situation, be even more proactive than I am. I'll be able to step back and focus on things that I can do to add value to the firm in total and ways that I can use my skill and my experience to enhance the advice experience, to enhance the client experience, to enhance the service experience that are going to benefit all of our clients. So at the end of the day, even though, quote, you may be losing me, you're gaining someone who's going to be able to devote even more time to you. And longer term, you're going to get an even greater experience because I'll be able to spend more of my time doing the things that will really benefit all clients instead of just the clients that I might be working one-on-one with. So lots of good ways, I think, here to actually communicate this change. All right, so part 2, let's move on to that. So part 2 is where the rubber meets the road. So this is where we have the joint client meetings. And I don't have a particular time in terms of how long is all of this prep going to take before you actually start having these conversations. I think each of you are going to have to decide individually what makes the most sense. I can say this, it's not going to be a matter of weeks in the preparation phase. I think it could be a matter of months in terms of getting all of that stuff in place. So hopefully you're planning far enough in advance where you do have a number of months that you can do in this initial phase 1 part of starting to elevate the visibility of your associate advisors, starting to get the messaging in place, making changes to the website to reflect increased prominence of your associate advisor or associate advisors that you're transitioning to. Maybe you want to create some videos that you can put on the website and prominently feature these associate advisors. So all that stuff's going to take some time. So let's assume you got all that done. Now we're going to move into the phase of having these joint meetings. And so it may turn out that even prior to starting the official transition, you may already been having this associate advisor sitting in on the meetings with the client. And that's fantastic. So that would be great if you've already done that. If not, then we need to start getting that person in there. So one way to think about this that might make it easy is rather than calling a special meeting with the client to have this transition conversation, just have these meetings as they normally come up in the course of your review meeting schedule. So again, we've got the two lists. We've got the key list, and then we've got the secondary list. So with that key list of clients, just go through and see as they come up in the natural order here for the transition or for the review meetings, then we bring in that associate advisor and you have that initial conversation with the client, say, hey, Joe Smith is going to be sitting in on our meetings going forward. I think Joe, he's been with us for so long and so forth, and he's going to be taking a more prominent role in our conversations. In fact, in our conversation today, he's going to lead our discussion about, so you're introducing Joe and you're getting them more involved and you're getting the client to feel more comfortable. And then as part of that, you'll also start letting the client know that Joe's going to be following up with you on this, or Mary's going to be following up with you on this. And that way you're starting to get the client to understand that, okay, this is my new day-to-day contact. And so we're starting to get that transition to happen. And then I think it's also important that as we think about the agenda that the associate advisor gets involved in, setting that agenda for that review meeting. And the leadership idea here is rather than you telling the advisor, hey, I think we should talk about this and this, let the advisor come up with it and say, hey, what do you think we should be talking about? We've done the brain dump, we've done the data dump here earlier, and you've reviewed the case here. So what do you think we should be talking about in this review meeting? So we can use that as a learning and training opportunity. And again, let the advisor take a more prominent role. So let me stop there. Amy, anything to add to that piece?
Yeah, as you're preparing for that first joint meeting, we've got some scripts in here. You mentioned that we're going to have with this accompanying the podcast, but one thing I guess I want to make sure that we're touching on is the importance of role play. If you can't say the actual statement to a coworker, you're probably going to stumble over as you're speaking to your client. So spend some time, go back and forth on some of the things you might want to say, have that conversation with that new advisor, the associate advisor, and they're going to learn how that takes place as well, help you feel more confident. And everybody hates role plays. I've never had anybody I've talked to that says, oh boy, let's do a role play. But it is such a great teaching tool.
It is, because the first time that you want to do something new like that, you don't want to test it on a client, right? You want to, let's do a low risk environment. Let's do it with a team member. Let's do it with a spouse. Let's do it with a friend, that sort of thing. Let's do it with another colleague. So that way, if you're going to make a mistake, I'd rather make a mistake when nobody important is watching me. And so, yeah, so the role playing, definitely a great idea there. So a second part here in the joint client meetings is about what I would call sort of joint communication initiatives. And what I mean by this is simple things like your email signature, that going forward, your email communication to the client should be signed by both you and your associate advisor. In fact, you might even put the associate advisor's name first on there and your name second. Again, just so the client is starting to see the associate advisor's name more often, more prominently. So I think that's a simple thing that you can do. I think another thing that you can do is that when the client calls in, or if the client emails in with a question, let's say they call in and let's say they get someone at the front desk. The front desk person needs to be trained. In fact, they should have a list of that client list number one. They should have a list of those clients. They should have the name of the associate advisor that is attached to that client that's being transitioned. And if one of those clients calls in, then the person at the front desk there, they should say, well, lead advisor is not available at the moment, but Joe is available. Mary's available. Let me get you over to Joe. And I think they'll be able to handle your question here. We got to make sure that the team is trained on making sure that they're the traffic cop here and that they're sending as many of those inquiries from the client as possible to the associate advisor and not the senior advisor. So that's going to take some training. That's an important step that I see a lot of advisors miss, or they may be aware of it, but they don't do a good job of actually making sure that happens, that the rest of the team is trained, that the rest of the team is directing the traffic and making sure that as many of those inquiries as possible go to the associate advisor. So I think that'll be a key piece there. Anything else on that one, Amy?
Yeah, let's not forget some advisors can be a little bit of a control freak. So
Oh, no,
I don't know if you've worked with any advisors like that, but I
not
have
at
a
all.
couple. It's hard to let go. And so, as the lead advisor, if a client gets to you and you're talking to them and they have a request like, their RMDs, what is it? That's a great opportunity to still have your small talk, still talk to them, update on what's going on. So you still have that relationship with them, but then saying, you know what, Joe has been working on RMDs for all of my clients. Would it be okay if I transfer you over to him and he can get you that information? It's a good way to, again, the senior advisor has to still give up that control, even though you can probably find that answer just as easily. This is a great way for you to reinforce Joe knows what he's doing here. I have complete confidence.
Yeah, and this control idea, it's a very important one. And one of the ways that I talk to my clients, I talk to advisors about that is, and this applies to anything that you do. This is essentially when we think about time management. To me, it's not really about time management. It's about priorities management. It's about values hierarchies. And what I mean by that is if I say, hey, I'm a control freak and I don't want to give up these relationships, or I feel like I got to answer this question, that sort of thing. Basically, what you're saying is that of all the things that I could be doing with my time right now, it's more important for me to do this thing with this client. And if that's the case, then you may never make the transition.
Right.
But ultimately, what you have to think about is if I look at everything in my life, and if I look at everything that I could possibly do, and if I look at what I say my values are, what I say is important to me, then ultimately there's a hierarchy here. And so if you think of it as a pyramid, at the very top of that pyramid are your truest and highest values. And then things just cascade down from there. And so you have to ask yourself if keeping some of these clients or answering some of these questions from these clients after I think I've made a transition is, where does that sort of rate here? Where does that rank on this hierarchy of values in terms of what's most important to you, in terms of what you can do? And so I think if you think of it in terms of a values hierarchy or a values comparison, which value is more important to me at this stage in my life? And
Mm-hmm.
I think what a lot of advisors find is that after doing this for 20 years or 30 years, it's like having 4 or 5 client meetings a day is not my highest value anymore. I've got other things that I want to do with my time, that I want to do with my life. And so if you start ranking those values and keeping them clear and keeping them front and center, I think it's going to make it easier for you to make that transition and give up some of these things that you have a lot of history with, give up some of these people that you have a lot of history with, move them to other folks so that you can get on with your life and do other things that are more important to you at this stage of your life. Third one here in terms of part two is to continue to enhance the relationship. And what I'm talking about here is the associate advisor needs to do everything that they can. They need to go above and beyond in terms of trying to deepen the relationship with this new client of theirs. And so they need to be doing things like acknowledging special occasions in the client's life, whether it's calling them for their birthday. And Amy, you and I go back in our Peak Advisor Alliance days. That was one of the things we would talk about, little things like call your clients on their birthday. Today, we can just text them. That's pretty easy. A lot of advisors, I suspect, are texting their clients for the birthday, so that's pretty easy to do. But invite them out for breakfast, coffee, take them out to lunch, invite them to golf, do whatever you can to start deepening that relationship. And we want to make sure that the client does not feel like there's any drop off in the level of communication or any drop off in the depth of the relationship that they have with you relative to the advisor that they had been working with. So it's really incumbent upon the associate advisor to go above and beyond and do everything that they can to really deepen that relationship and give it every opportunity to succeed. And who knows, maybe the associate advisor will have a better relationship with the client. To your point earlier about maybe the relationship has run its course with the senior advisor and they both need a new experience. So this just might be that little extra oomph that gives some new life into the relationship. So it will likely be win for everybody in the long run here.
Yeah. And I would say here, this is a great opportunity if you don't, as a firm, already have a client service matrix set up of what those expectations are. Those birthday calls, random acts of kindness, or anniversary reach outs, calling your husband in the relationships to say, hey, your anniversary's coming up, what are your plans? Great reminder subtly that don't forget your wife. But having that client service matrix set up, how often should you be reaching out to your clients? And also time blocking, because often the senior advisor, the lead advisor can help the associate advisor start doing some time blocking on their calendar. So maybe every Wednesday afternoon, it happens to be, this is my client relationship development time. And so maybe that's calling their clients, maybe it's sending cards, maybe it's scheduling an outing, but having that scheduled time to remind yourself of, okay, I can't just be thinking of new clients to bring in. I have to make sure the relationships I have are developed and strong.
And the fourth part here in part two of having the joint client meetings is to make sure that we are continuing to reinforce the team approach here. And so when you're having these conversations, when you're in the meetings with the client, it is important to reinforce the fact that this isn't about you. It's not about the associate advisor. It's about the team that you've built here. And so you can even say to the client, you're not losing me, you're gaining the rest of the team here. And so I'm not going away. If that is the case, if you're not going away anytime soon, that your role is just changing. You really want to continue to build up the team, because the more connections, the more relationships that your clients have with different team members, the harder it's going to be for them to ever leave, because they know that if I've got a relationship with Joe or Mary, who's my advisor, and I also know Mike, who's in the ops area, and I know Pete, who's the chief investment officer, and I know Colleen, who is the marketing person, because she's the one that does the events and I get to see her at all the events that I go to. If you've got all these multiple relationships with people at the firm, it's going to be really hard for that client to leave, because now they're leaving multiple people. So that, I think, is going to be really helpful, really reinforcing the importance of the team aspect here. So anything else on part two
Yeah,
here, Amy, before we jump into
that's
number
such
three?
an important part. That team aspect is, I've had plenty of advisors, unfortunately, who have hired associate advisors or associate advisors who, one, maybe didn't work out, or two, left the firm. And sometimes when they leave the firm, they take the clients with them. And so having that team approach, so they have a relationship with yourself, with the team, with maybe other advisors who have acted as specialists. If you have a financial planning specialist, that relationship, you have an insurance specialist. So yeah, that team approach really solidifies the relationship with the firm, not just one individual, because that advisor could leave. That advisor could grow to a point where maybe now they're needing to transition clients to another advisor potentially as well. So yeah, that team approach is vital to the continuity of the firm and the firm's success.
Excellent. All right. So part three here is what I call debrief and adjust. And so this is simply that as you're going through this process, as you're having these transition conversations with your clients and introducing the associate advisor, we want to make sure that there is an ongoing process with you and the associate advisor and any other members of your team that would be appropriate to have debrief conversations to talk about, how is this going? Are we hearing any feedback from our clients? What's working? What's not working? What stories or analogies are resonating or not resonating? What kind of objections are we getting? Are the responses that we've prepared for those objections, are those effective? Are they working? Were the clients not buying them? So based on the feedback, are there any adjustments that we need to be making to the process that we're delivering here? And so these debrief meetings, they could be ad hoc. Certainly, if you've got a situation where you're having a meeting and it didn't go well, then we want to have a debrief like right away and figure out, okay, what happened here? What can we do different? We don't want to let that fester, so to speak. But beyond the immediate ones, make sure we've got some scheduled time on a regular basis to evaluate the process overall and figure out what enhancements can we make. I would also say that you could consider doing a bit of a client survey. So you might want to solicit some formal feedback from your clients that you are transitioning after some point in time and just see what kind of feedback they have. This one you got to be a little careful with in that you don't necessarily want to, if the client wasn't necessarily thrilled, but they're still there, you just have to be a little sensitive to that in terms of, is a survey the best way to do that? Or should you just talk to them and reach out to them or send them a text and ask them if they want to have a conversation? So only you can determine what's the best route to go, whether it is a survey or whether you need to have more of a personal touch with that. So another thing I would add to that is that this is a big deal. Making transitions like this are big things. And so I think it's important as a firm to celebrate this in terms of if you reach certain milestones. I've got some clients that I'm working with where as part of our coaching, we're setting specific objectives where we're saying this quarter, we're going to transition 10 clients, or we're going to transition 5, or we're going to transition 20 clients to the associate advisor. So we are tracking that hard and fast. We're tracking that. And so as we hit those milestones, we can celebrate that. We can recognize that. And I think it's important to give yourself a bit of a pat on the back when you get these things done, because as I mentioned, Erin, Scannell, it's hard. It's really hard to move these relationships to other folks in the firms. As you make those transitions, ultimately, what's for the long-term benefit of you, it's for the long-term benefit of the firm, and it's for the long-term benefit of the client as well. So let's make sure that we get the feedback, that we celebrate the milestones here, and we make adjustments along the way as need be.
Yeah, and just be sure if you're getting client feedback and making some changes to the way you're going to communicate, you've got feedback that a client was like, oh, yeah, they pushed back on a certain thing. Make sure you're passing that to the others in the team who might be affected, might just not be the advisor and the new advisor or that are going to be affected. It could be that director of first impressions. It could be the relationship manager. So just make sure that that's communicated to everybody who needs to be aware of changes you're making to the plan.
Okay, so let me just summarize what we've got here. So is in terms of making this transition from one advisor to another, we talked about really 3 phases here. So part 1 is that initial planning and communication process. Part 2 is where the rubber meets the road, and that's the joint client meetings. And then part 3 is this debrief and adjust and really celebrate and recognize the milestones along the way. So those are the 3 phases. I also had mentioned that we do have some examples of scripts and stories and analogies and common objections that you're likely to hear during this process. And we've got our responses on how you would overcome those objections. So you can get that in a Word doc that you can download by going to stevesanduski.com and searching for this episode. Amy, anything else that you want to add? Any other things that you want to caution advisors to be aware of in this process?
Yeah, great question. And this has been a fun conversation. I would say one of the biggest things that I would have an advisor avoid is not transferring clients too soon, especially to an associate advisor. I've definitely seen that done and advisors are overwhelmed. You told me Erin had what you said 800 clients. Yeah, you're overwhelmed. You want to get to a point where you can breathe again, because that's a lot of appointments a day and throughout the year. But transferring clients, making that transition, going through this process, and then transferring them to your clients, getting them transferred. If you do that and that advisor doesn't work out, whether you don't feel they're the right fit after they've been in the position or for a while, or they need to be in a different role, or they just choose, hey, this is not the role for me. You don't want to have to do that to your clients multiple times. And so that's not going to be a good view for the firm. So that's why it's great to have them in the client meetings as a support for you as the senior advisor. And if at some point they're a good fit, maybe a couple of years even after they've been with the firm, then you start introducing them as they're going to take over as your primary advisor. You've got to know them, that sort of thing.
Excellent. All right. Amy, thank you for being part of the show here today. And for each of you listening, I hope that you find some value in this. I hope it's helpful. Again, make sure that you visit stevesanduski.com. You can get all the details for this episode. And if you like what you're hearing, please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. If you haven't already, please tell your friends and colleagues about it as well. And we very much appreciate that. So great. So we'll wrap there. Again, Amy, thanks. And we'll look forward to seeing each of you and hearing from each of you on the next episode of Between Now and Success.